Hello, this is Rev Brad. Today's From the Touchline podcast is a little bit longer. I'm joined by Soccer Chaplains United Director of Counseling, Brooke Ewert. This is a recorded conversation that we had, and we're talking about chaplaincy and counseling. I think it's tremendously important, especially this time of year. During the holiday season, it can be really difficult for many people, and for many different reasons. So whether you're an athlete, a coach, an executive, or a staff member, a fan even, if there's a way that we can support you, please reach out to us. That's part of what Soccer Chaplains United is about, offering our chaplaincy and counseling services to support you, your family, wherever you are during this time in this season. So thanks for listening today.
He's found the space, and he's found the back of the net.
Just a little off foot, thinking he's going to go far post. Not strong enough with his right hand.
Whips that one in. Far post, almost made him ends, and they have. He has the hat-trick. The second in his career. The third of the night. The hat-trick hero.
Talked about you're not going to be able to sustain that kind of pressure.
To the corner. Goes towards the near post. And you're the angle, and what a goal! What a goal!
Welcome. Today we want to talk about chaplaincy and counseling in sport, and a little bit of this comes from a presentation that was done at Calvin University in October 2019. With me in studio is Volunteer Director of Counseling for Soccer Chaplains United, Brooke Ewert. Brooke?
Hi, how are you?
Brooke, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about your role and what you do with Soccer Chaplains United and with the work we do.
So my name is Brooke Ewert. I also am the founder of Rocky Mountain Sports Counseling Center. Brad and I would say one of our biggest goals is to provide counseling for athletes who maybe are getting looked over, or maybe an athlete who isn't being recognized that they actually have some mental health issues going on. So trying to identify those with chaplains and helping them to recognize the symptoms of athletes who are having some mental health situations that they're not even aware of as well.
Now, sometimes people say, hey, Rev, you guys are Soccer Chaplains United. What's counseling got to do with any of this? Let me explain. So one of the values that we have is, as chaplains, is to see people as whole persons, as whole beings, really. And so part of that includes not just the spiritual, but the emotional and the mental well-being of a person. And there are some ways that a pastor or a chaplain can address or help those kinds of things, but there's certain moments and places where it might be more appropriate or more helpful for someone who's like a counselor trained, like you are, Brooke, with some of those different interventions and skills that can get more at, I would say, the heart of the issue, but it's really the mind of the issue
Right.
sometimes, or the emotion behind the issue, and can be with a person in a different kind of relationship than a chaplain might normally have. So today, what we want to talk a little bit about today is I want to share a little bit, how did this transpire? How did it happen for Soccer Chaplains United? How did we come to bring counseling into the mix, and sort of what's gone on from there? Now, most of you know that I've been the volunteer chaplain with Colorado Rapids of Major League Soccer for some 18 seasons. Before that, I worked for the club in the PR department before going to seminary, and I've spent some time as a hospice chaplain. I worked in a large major church in the Denver metro area, and now the work that I do is growing and building up Soccer Chaplains United. And some of the values that have come as we've grown, as we've worked through this is, as I mentioned, this sense of holistic care around the people in sport. So that can be the athletes. It's also the coaches. It's the staff. It's the family members. Sometimes even the fans of the game. All of these folks are within the scope of what we want to try and do and who we want to try to care for. We utilize as chaplains a pastoral care framework. So there's a lot of times that we're there in crisis moments, but we're also there in celebration moments too, like a birth or a wedding, and we officiate those things. We celebrate wins and trophies, and we're there in the hard times too as chaplains. And so the other part to that is we've developed a team approach. A lot of times in sports ministry, you can see some lone rangers or individuals that kind of just are out there and they're supporting. But for me, the story of how this came about and having a team approach came as I was sitting across from an athlete one day. And we were sitting in an IHOP restaurant, International House of Pancakes. And I remember, Brooke, he sat there and he told me, he goes, Rev, do you see this plate of pancakes? I'm going to eat this, and then I'm going to go purge to keep weight for the team. And Brooke, I remember just feeling so, just so helpless, maybe even in a moment. I knew enough to know that I wasn't prepared or qualified to do this. And this really began the journey for us of linking and adding counseling into the work that we do. And so fast forward a few years, we had an initial counselor that was on our team and part of what we were doing, and we sought to grow that. And we started to realize there's some people that aren't being cared for, and some of that included the wives, girlfriends, the partners of the athletes and coaches, the family members, and so enter in Brooke Ewert.
Well, so the interesting thing is, just to kind of back up just a little bit into my story, I feel like God really started preparing me actually in high school, just trying to figure out what was the difference between maybe an elite athlete versus just an athlete who just so happened to play a sport. And I felt like God was really asking me, like, what's really different. I went to college, I took a sports psychology class, just absolutely loved it, got to work with athletes. I got to see what the research side was like, and then God put a huge hold on all of that. I got married. We had 4 kids. We raised them until it was a stay-at-home mom until all of them went to school.
Life got in the way? Are you kidding?
Life got in the way. But at that point, I felt like God really spoke to me in a very clear way and said, I need you to go back to school right now. So very quickly, in obedience, went to Denver Seminary and told them, this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in helping athletes on their mental health side. And it was really kind of one of those, like, look at me thinking, what are you talking about? Because really at the time, even just 5, 6, 7 years ago, there really wasn't much work being done with athletes on the mental health side. There was the performance side, but not the mental health. And I think now, now coming back full circle, it's definitely started to come to, wow, athletes have mental health issues, and how do we address those? And, the cool thing is that God is opening doors that I never in a million years would have thought possible. And even, just working with the Colorado Rapids, the soccer team and the developmental academy, the young ones, we're already seeing that there's a need in helping them to realize that the need is there for them. And there's people to come alongside of them and say, we're here to help.
Brooke, for a moment, would you tell us the difference between, you kind of touched on this word, this language around sports psychology. What's the difference, though, between a counselor like yourself in sport and a sports psychologist or a performance expert or whatever the language may be? What's the difference?
Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a funny story. So I've actually tried to explain this to athletes before, and I always feel like I get myself into trouble. And I actually explained it to an athlete once, and she said, I'm so confused. And I said, me too, because the gray line is so sure. Small. But the best way I would say is a sports psychologist is much more on performance. They are looking to make the athlete better on the field through drills or through some sort of mental performance technique. I'm not really as concerned about their performance because I feel like the root of most of their issues is somehow some sort of mental health issue, where it's anxiety or depression. If you have someone that's anxious or depressed, they're not going to be performing well. So you kind of got to get to the root of it and figure out what's actually going on. So I think just to kind of narrow it down as best as I could, I would say the actual performance versus the actual mental health is the best way to delineate between the two.
Yeah, I wonder, and I almost feel like maybe that's a little bit of common ground that sometimes the chaplain and counselor might have, is that for myself as a chaplain, I know that God's going to work through the wins and the losses,
right.
Sometimes more so through the losses, more so through the trials and tragedies of the game. than through the wins and successes. Sometimes when we win or we're doing so well, we don't need God, we don't need others, we don't need faith, we don't need to address the underlying issues that may be present in our lives. And so I wonder if that's a little bit of common ground that we might share. I do know this, if you're listening and you're an athlete, again, we want to kind of share like some of these things based on your framework. So take the lens of where you're at in the game right now. If you're an athlete, a coach, an executive listening to the podcast, if you're a up and coming player or a parent, whatever your role, whatever your kind of station around the game, there's some things we want to kind of teach and kind of coach and talk about in this podcast, including the difference between a chaplain and a counselor. So let me get into a few of the things from the chaplain side. In terms of chaplaincy, most of the chaplains with Soccer Chaplains United are ordained, seminary trained. They've got continuing ed. They tend to be working or serving in another capacity outside of Soccer Chaplains United. So they've got accountability and skill sets and other things that make them just really wonderful to work with and really attuned into people. But the chaplain has a few differences from a counselor in that usually our training has been more along the lines of pastoral counseling rather than clinical counseling. And I'll let Brooke talk about some of those unique things and those differences. As a chaplain, I would say some of my experience and background is not into, when that athlete told me that they had an eating disorder, or he didn't say eating disorder, but I knew eating disorder. I hadn't been trained in how to properly address those things. I knew enough to maybe make a referral. I knew I need to get this person to someone else who can help. But I myself had not been trained in how to provide good, healthy interactions and interventions for that person. So probably good that I knew my boundaries, probably good to get that person into the right place, the right relationship. But some other things that kind of are a challenge for the chaplain at times is we have shifting boundaries. A different head coach could come in, a different management or ownership group could come in, and now all of a sudden the spaces where the chaplain's been free to access people and spend time and create moments and movements, maybe those things have changed. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. Also, too, I've just encountered people sometimes that have religious superstition. And so for whatever reasons, maybe they need their own person around or they've got their own things and they may have some feelings about counseling that kind of set them off to that. I've also seen, too, sometimes poor theology, people that come in and they think, well, I've got to say the right prayers and I got to do the right things in order to achieve something. And so all these things kind of become a little bit of a barrier for the chaplain. And the last one that I want to just touch on real quick, Brooke, before you jump in is sometimes when I make a referral, I have a little bit of referral remorse because I'm handing this relationship, this person that I've walked with into someone else to care for. Oh no, I'm not Superman. I'm not, I've got to lay the Messiah complex to the side and I'm not going to walk with them any longer or in the same way or as deeply into this issue as maybe a counselor would. And sometimes I kind of, I want to hold on. I want to hold tight. A lot of my colleagues say my guys all the time or my people, my girls, they use that language in a possessive sense. And I think, oh man, let me be careful because I don't want to hold on too tightly to this role, to the thing that I'm doing, to the detriment of the person I'm really trying to serve.
Yeah. And I think just from there, I'll just go ahead and talk about the challenges for the counselor. And even, I honestly cannot be with the athletes all the time. It'd be very odd for me to be following them around and also really a little creepy because they don't want me on the field.
What are you saying about chaplains? Are we creepy? Maybe.
No, you guys are wonderful. You're in the spaces that I just cannot be at all. In those quiet moments when the athlete's going to reveal probably something that's going on that is really bothering them. And I think, establishing credibility for me, it would be really difficult for me just to walk into a front office of any professional team or college and say, hey, this is what I do. They're probably going to need someone that either has faith in me or has seen me practice or has seen the results of the athletes that I've worked with to give me a little bit of credibility in the beginning. And then, the results speak for themselves moving forward. Faith for me is a big piece of counseling, but, I have athletes who are not believers at all. So, that part just gets left at the door, which is difficult. But, honestly, I feel like God brings the people that he wants to me. And, sometimes that'll come back through in a different conversation. Resources, is always an interesting thing for me. I don't have this ability to do a sliding scale for every single person that walks the door. So I have to be very selective with that. But also, again, God is bringing these people to me. So how do I do that in a very healthy way? And then, one of the biggest challenges right now is there are just not that many sports counselors out there. So there's a very small referral list of people that we can give athletes off to that we trust. And then, the reverse referral, going back to Brad's last point when he was talking about the challenges of chaplaincy. Now ethically, I am not allowed to do a reverse referral, but how do I do that in a healthy way? If there's a disclosure statement where there's someone that really is struggling with faith, how do I pass them back gently to Brad without breaking confidentiality?
Yeah, those are all certainly things that we're working through, that we're trying to learn about and get through. Brooke, I wonder, do you feel like sometimes the athletes maybe that you've seen, that they feel like they've been dumped on you, or what are there other challenges just around even getting into that space where they'll come meet with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? I honestly feel like, and I think we've talked about this, the biggest thing is, getting these athletes in. The barrier to get them in is huge. But I think if there's a really good link between the chaplain and the counselor, or a parent and the counselor, or a wife and the counselor, there tends to be a really good transition from one to the next. They tend to trust. Again, it goes back to the credibility. If someone has faith that you can work with the athlete always tends to follow along very closely, and the trust comes very quickly.
Yeah. Well, some of the things that we've had to work through and learn, we've mentioned a little bit, but in terms of linking chaplaincy and counseling, we want to kind of dive into some of those things as well. And I would just say, if you're an athlete and you've never experienced counseling, there's an easy way to do that. There's an easy way to engage, and we'll have some contact information in the podcast liner notes that you can reach out to Brooke or myself, and we can help you find the resources for wherever you're at. And again, we're developing those resources. We're developing what does it look like for a chaplain and a counselor to be on a team. I think one of the best models that I've seen in my time comes out of the interdisciplinary model, which comes out of the healthcare system, where we look at it's called patient-centered care. We might say athlete-centered care, and we might include we might expand that to say coaches, family, staff, whatever it is. But when we look at the key relationships around a person, we want to have a chaplain who can deal with spiritual, religious needs, a counselor that can deal with emotional, mental health needs and well-being needs, and there could be other relationships that are needed as well too. You think about, at least in the healthcare model, you've got doctors, CNAs, you have social workers. You have financial aid specialists. You have all these people that kind of come around someone to help them flourish and grow. And so in a similar way, we're kind of building out those kinds of things. But that takes a team, and it takes teamwork. And some of the things that have been really difficult at times has been even role distinction, for example. Brooke,
Yeah.
do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think who has what role and how does that come across to each of the athletes? I think too of, okay, who's got this? And I think too, even just going to the role distinction is the handing off. How do we hand off in a really good way so that the athlete knows that we trust the next person that they're being handed off to? There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes for us with that. We are never just handing off just to hand off. We are thinking through it, praying through it, trying to figure out if this is a good match. What do you think?
Yeah, I think those are challenges. Is how do we make those handoffs? And I think one of the things that affects that is the transient nature of the game. And here we're talking football, we're talking soccer, very transient. If I had $1 for every time Jose Mourinho's moved on to a different coaching of a team, I'd be wealthy. So would many other people. But you see sometimes this transient nature within the game where athletes, coaches, staff are constantly on the move. And so it's really hard to establish and develop trust, for one, but then a caregiving relationship, whether that's the chaplain or the counselor, the transient nature of the game really has an impact.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that over the last few years of making sure that as someone does transition to a new community, that we either have people that we already know that we hand them off to, again, kind of back to that handoff word, or we have already done a lot of work with referrals. And I think, just kind of making sure we get this phrase in is the stigma of sports is just, or the stigma with counseling in sports is just still very big. We hear a lot of athletes say, oh, I don't need help, I'm fine. And then, they're just not doing okay. And making sure that we actually have people in front of them who are telling their story. Like, this is something that really helped me. Even if it's just one person on every club that we work with that can say counseling helped. And, we call them, it's our special phrase of their torchbearers. They're shining the light in the darkness where they think they're all alone and isolated.
Yeah, and perhaps there's no better advocate than the person who's been helped and received that help. And, in the same way that counseling has a stigma, I would say religion in general has a stigma in sport, especially more the global sports like football, like hockey, some of those things. But, some of the American sports may have a little bit different feel and take on religious expression in and around the club, the locker room, the team. But those stigmas are things that we often have to educate people around. Sometimes it's a generational thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of a way that someone's been coached, or it could be a personality thing that kind of gets in the way of receiving help, receiving care, whether from a chaplain or a counselor. Well, Brooke, we're running a little long on time or a little short on time, but let's talk about some of the areas where we've seen some good things happen in working together. What are some of those things where you've enjoyed working together with a chaplain?
Yeah, I think for me, the fun thing is, just those handoffs of, hey, I have someone that needs help. How can we support this person? And the counselor coming in, whether it's myself or someone else, and saying, let's work through this. Let's figure out how to get you to a healthier place mentally. I think that's been a big thing. Just even thinking through working in the family suite over the last few years, and the relationships that have developed with the athletes' wives or their girlfriends or their families, and just to say, hey, we're here for you. Some of those, Brad and I have kind of laughed over, 2 or 3 years, a time of 2 or 3 years of difference, from the second that I walked in to when the referral actually came. Those people are watching, they're listening, and they really want the support, and knowing that we're there helps so much.
Yeah, I've enjoyed working together in some of the educational moments that we get, whether we're preparing for a conference or doing a parent education, an athlete education. Here we get the chance to talk about what is counseling. Hey, let's acknowledge there's a stigma, but why does that stigma exist? And is it true? Is it right? Is it fair? And do we need to work through those things so that someone can get appropriate help? I enjoy seeing the light come on in someone's eyes. I always think it's funny too when when someone says, "Hey, tell so and so hi for me," and it's like, "Oh yeah, we can't really do that because we're keeping confidentiality here, and we don't." We realize, but we can't realize. We know, but we don't know, or we don't know, and then it's just kind of a weird sort of relationship sometimes.
Well, and I think that it always makes me laugh too, because they obviously don't know that we adhere to different ethics and principles, that we're not sharing the situations between each other, but more of just hey, if you have this person, let's make sure that they're cared for. So we really we're very mindful about that when we're working with these athletes.
Yeah, it feels sometimes a little stilted and awkward, but we know that at the end of the day that they have the absolute protection of confidentiality and privacy that they need to get the help that they desire, that they need, that sometimes they don't even know about.
Yeah.
And I think, if you're an executive, if you're someone listening, you're in club leadership, I think this helps the bottom line, right? You want better people, you want well-rounded people, you want people to feel supported and loved and cared for, and they tend to be better employees. They tend to be better in terms of how they interact and the sort of things they speak into the ethos of a club culture or some of those other elements. As they receive and feel cared for, it just goes on exponentially, doesn't it, Brooke?
Yeah, it really does. And I think another word that maybe we haven't used is the word holistic, and maybe it was used at the very beginning of this podcast, but the phrase holistic, we are just so concerned about the whole person and not just the athlete themselves. We want to see them be well-rounded.
So, Brooke, I'm imagining there's an athlete, there's someone out there listening, and they go, or maybe it's even someone who wants to do counseling in sport. What are some ways to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can get a hold of me through Rocky Mount Sports Counseling Center, or you can also get through Soccer Chaplains United, our website. We're all connected through both ways, and it would be welcome conversations. We are really excited. If you are actually even interested in working with athletes in sports counseling, we'd love to have a conversation with you there as well.
Yeah, we're looking to grow out a network, and that network has no bounds. And, on the chaplain side, I'm always looking to grow chaplains for particular teams and clubs at all levels. And we're doing the same with counseling. We're growing a network, which tends to be more geographically based, but we're exploring things, and we're working really hard to pioneer in this field. So if you're a student of counseling, if you're a student for chaplaincy, if you're more interested in this, if you're interested in getting behind this in other ways, please reach out to us. If you're someone that has influence in an institution or an organization and you say, hey, we want this for our soccer team, our soccer club, our soccer entity, whatever that is, please reach out to us as well. You've got our contact details will be in the liner notes here. And thank you guys for listening. This is Rev Brad and Brooke coming to you from the Touchline.